Alright, so welcome. This is a short mini lesson about objectives. I will have mentioned objectives just a little bit in class, and you probably have heard about objectives before. You probably have heard about it in other classes you've taken as part of a lesson. So you may have some ideas in your mind about what an objective is. But anyway, let's just start with something a little bit different. Is if you were going to plan a lesson, or if you do plan lessons, how do you normally plan a lesson? For most people, it's pretty common to think about the topic of the lesson, then think about the specific contents of the lesson, and then think about the rest. So, to give an example, an English teacher might think, I'm going to teach a grammar class. That would be the topic. Then they might think, now I'm going to teach the contents. Now, what are the contents of grammar I'm going to teach? I'm going to teach about past tense, for example. And then they'll plan the rest of the lesson. What specific examples are they going to use? How difficult will it be? What activities are they going to do? And so on and so forth. This is a pretty common way of thinking about lessons that most people who don't study education would do naturally. Now the question I have at the bottom there, what do you think of first? So last week when we talked about designing a lesson, what did you think about first when you were first thinking about the lesson? Probably you thought about the topic, right? You probably thought, what's a topic that I'm interested in, or what's something I know a lot about, or what's something I'm good at, and how can I teach it? This is pretty common and natural kind of thing. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit now about objectives, which I think are where you should start when you're planning a lesson. So as I've said here, an objective is the purpose or the goal of a lesson. It's what you're aiming for when you are at the completion of your lesson, or at least what you hope to get to. Now, I think the main reason they're useful is that they focus the lesson. So what that means is, or what I mean by this, is that objectives are really just a tool. They're not magic. They're not special. They're just useful tools to help us design a lesson that has more direction. Okay? So if you're watching this video, I will have already asked you to write down some objectives. So make sure they're close to your hand or nearby so you can see them for the rest of the video. So we're going to go through these objectives and talk about them, right? So maybe change them and hopefully make them better. So I'm going to talk about the way that I like to make objectives. This is my way of doing it. This is the way that's useful for me. And it isn't perfect. Like I said, objectives aren't magic. They're just there to make it a better lesson and to make the ideas clearer in our own minds about how we should teach. Also, the reason I do it this way is it's really easy and fast. So lesson planning shouldn't be difficult. It shouldn't be something you spend a lot of time doing. So you want an efficient, clean, fast way of making a lesson. So step 0, kind of before the first step, is have a look at any objective you've already made. So it's probably going to look something like this. Students will know how to use past tense. Students will be able to give directions, something like that. Students will know about the history of World War II, or students will know about Sejong Daewon, or something like that. These are pretty common kind of objectives, and the structure of them is pretty usual, right? So what we're going to do is we're just going to go through and take these kind of objectives and change them. The first thing, or step, is I like to use a name instead of students. So the reason I do this is it really makes me think about the student. It really makes me think about what's going to happen during my lesson, right? Because like I said, this is just a tool. There's no special reason to use students. Just the reason is it makes me think about what's happening inside my lesson. It really focuses me, right? So maybe you think of your favorite student. If you've been taking my class, You know I like to use the student Minsu or Minjong because they were two of my favorite students the first year I taught at university, so I often use them. But think of your favorite student, or if you don't have a favorite student, think about a particular person. Just thinking about somebody, some individual doing your lesson, in my opinion and in my experience, helps you focus on what's going to happen during your lesson. So step 2, and this is the trickiest part, and this is the part that is the most important, but most people will have trouble with, is write your objective as an actual action a student will take. Right, so a specific thing the student will do. Right, so things like write, say are very good verbs to use in objectives. You don't want words like learn, understand, think, be able to, can. They don't actually help you. What does learn mean? If I say, Jamie learns about past tense, what does that mean? It just has no meaning, right? If I change that to something like, Jamie will write a diary in past tense, it's so much more meaningful. It's so much easier to understand what is happening in that lesson. Even if you want your students to do a test, right? Write down that is the objective. The students will complete a test focused on XYZ. Students will complete a test that involves them writing the correct verbs in sentences or something like that. Because then you know what's going to happen, right? And like I said before, instead of saying students, use a name. You know, Jamie will write the correct verb tense in 5 sentences for a diary, something like that. Next step is make your objective more specific. And this is tricky, but usually when people first make objectives, they're too broad, and also they don't contain all the key features that are needed, right? So you want to include things that the conditions, what we call the conditions under which the objective will be met. So is the student going to be filling out a test? Is the student going to be listening and responding? So for example, is the teacher going to say something, then the student answers? Or is the student going to have a conversation with another student? Or something like that. You want the specific conditions or the specific situation under which the objectives will be met. Okay? So it will look like this. So students will learn about the days of the week. This is probably what your objective looks like to begin with, right? Then I want to change it to Minsu will learn about the days of the week. Now I'm thinking about my student Minsu. I'm thinking about his level. I'm thinking about him in the classroom. I'm thinking about what kind of person he is, what's going to be appropriate for him, right? Now learn, like I said, is not a good word. What does learn about days of the week? Is he going to write it? Is he going to hear it? Is he going to be able to say it? Is he going to memorize the spelling of the days of the week? I don't know if I just write learn, right? So I'm going to change it to something else. In this example, I've said say, right? So I know it's a speaking lesson or that this objective is focused on speaking. Minsu will say the days of the week. I don't need to worry about spelling. Maybe I don't need to worry about reading necessarily, right? Number 3, Minsu will say the days of the week in English when he is shown flashcards with Korean words for the days of the week. So now it's very specific, right? Now I know what's going to happen. At the end of my lesson, I'm going to show Minsu a flashcard. And on that flashcard, it's going to be in Korean one of the days of the week. For example, 토요일. And then he's meant to say Friday. And then I show him another one, 월요일. And he's meant to say Monday, and so on. Now I know that is my specific objective. If I have that, number 3, as an objective, it is very easy for me to plan my lesson. It is much easier to plan my lesson. I know my lesson's focused around speaking. I can think about pronunciation. I can practice that activity. I can get group work that's based on that activity. I don't need to worry about spelling. I don't need to worry about reading English. I don't need to worry about reading the days of the week in English, right? I know that I'm just focused on Minsu being able to say the days of the week, right? You may even add things about pronunciation or something like that into this. So what do we do with these objectives? We've already talked about Gagne's 9 events of instruction. So in my opinion, you take these objectives and you either replace the elicit performance stage. So basically the objectives are your activity, your main activity, or you put them in the assess performance stage. Either of those are fine, in my opinion. I would prefer for you, and I prefer for myself, to make a more complex objective and put it in the elicit performance stage. Have the heart of my lesson, the core or most important part of my lesson, be the objective, and therefore, in my opinion, in the elicit performance stage is the best place to put it, but it doesn't matter too much. So, as I said at the beginning, you probably have talked about objectives before, and maybe some of your other professors have told you how to make objectives and they've told you a different way. So why should you do the way that I told you? So the way that I told you is just my way. But like I said, this kind of objective just helps me more. So compare. The students will know about micro-teaching. So I've already talked to you about micro-teaching or the teaching cycle, right? Now compare that. The students will know about micro-teaching too. The Hesu will go through the 4 stages of micro-teaching. So notice that second objective. I'm thinking about Hesu, one of my students. I'm thinking about those 4 stages, going through them. Even going through is not as good, but let's just say I'm thinking about what will have to happen in my lesson. But no is so broad and so difficult for me to plan for. Whereas if I have a more specific objective like the second one, I can plan a better lesson, in my experience. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for watching this video. And you should do the activity that is attached to this video, as I've talked about in class. So have a good day. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next week.